All right, here we are for episode 5 of the exciting podcast, Natural Awakening, where I invite people to talk about meditation, awakening, science, and how all of that intersects in current people's lives. And my guest today is Roger. I don't actually know how to pronounce your last name. Thisdell?
No, Roger Thisdell.
Thisdell. Roger,
hello.
Please introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, hello, people. I'm Roger Thisdell. Yeah. What to say? What would you like to know?
So what are you up to these days? I know you're studying philosophy.
Yeah, I'm doing a master's in philosophy for now. We'll see how that goes and if I continue with it. But yeah, at the moment I'm doing that. I teach English online. I also teach meditation, and I'm in the process of renewing my American passport. I'm an Anglo-American, born and raised near London, but my father's from California, my mom's half American, but yeah, grew up in England for the most part, and now I live in Spain, and I'm getting on with life, connecting with people like you, and enjoying things, really. Yeah.
Great. And maybe you could just say a little bit about your childhood. I know there was some history of depression in your adolescence, if you're willing to share, and how that connects to what eventually brought you to your meditation practice.
Okay, cool. Let's run through it. So I think as things go, I was just genetically born with quite a low hedonic set point. So I was kind of, maybe I was a happy kid up until a point, but I think my level of well-being was below average. And then in my teenage years, I really became quite a cynical, pessimistic kid, one to kind of always look on the dark side of life. And but when I was 16, I remember I watched the movie Revolver by Guy Ritchie. And that movie is all about the main character, Jason Statham, is battling his ego. And it's quite a good movie, actually, but it's all about him versus his ego. And then at the end of that movie, during the credits, there's a bunch of talking heads talking about you are not your ego. The thing you think you are, you're not. And all these different people. And I was like, wow, what does that mean? First time I'm hearing these ideas. And I sort of started looking more into that, and I discovered Eckhart Tolle. And Eckhart Tolle started talking about, oh yes, you're not your ego, and talking about I don't know, thoughts being sort of problematic. The voice in your head, that's not you, and stuff like this. And that transformed me in a bit, kind of discovering that material. And then I remember at 16 sort of trying to test myself, like how long could I go without thinking in my head, trying to walk like a block down the street without any languaging happening. And yeah, then I sort of kind of got into meditation a little bit because of that, but just doing it for a few minutes, sort of focusing on my breathing to calm down, but nothing really profound. But meanwhile then, so it says depressed most of my teenage years, and then up until the age of 20, it really, really culminated. And I was sort of fixed on suicidal ideation by that point, like really thinking about it every day. And I felt really stuck in samsara, is one way to put it. Or maybe I didn't have a word for it at the time, but noticing the recursive desire, dissatisfaction, rinse, repeat cycle, and sort of thinking there's no way to get out of this. How do I get out of it? And really feeling like such tragedy at the suffering of the world. So it was kind of a depression. I didn't think my situation was so bad, but I just thought the world's situation so bad, and there's so much suffering. And I was like, oh, this is like, living in hell. Luckily, I never acted on it or anything like that. But Yeah, at the age of 20, then I had a magic mushroom experience, and that blew open the doors of perception. And I was astounded that it was a bad trip as well. It was a really, really terrifying trip. But I was astounded at how different one's experience to life could be, how altered consciousness could be. No one had ever told me that that was a possibility. And, you know, I kept thinking about that trip. And then I had another subsequent trip, and that second trip cured my depression, like from day to night. And what I noticed was my hedonic set point just got bumped up. So now all of a sudden I was more enthusiastic about life, looking forward to things. I swear, you know, the world actually seemed more colorful. And then that's when I started getting really serious about meditation. So quickly on from then, I started doing an hour of meditation practice a day, as like fueled by curiosity, just, you know, astounded what I experienced in these altered states. What is consciousness? What am I? What is this whole thing? And you know,
just a point of curiosity. What if you can trace it back to a specific event in either the first or the second experience with psilocybin? Was it an experience of ego dissolution, or, you know, colloquially ego death, that cured the depression, or was it just the vividness, the engagement with the world of the senses that kind of brought you out?
Yeah, so I didn't have ego death or ego loss during those trips. It's actually, the first trip was so bad because the ego is desperately trying to hold on, because it felt like my short-term memory and my long-term memory was lapsing, and it felt like every 2 seconds I was being reborn and refreshed, and there was something in the middle trying to hold on to the coherency and track everything as it happening, but I was like losing my memory and really trying to hold on. And it was this that was petrifyingly frightening. The second trip, what struck me was that was a difficult trip as well, but on the come down of it, I was feeling good. I felt like, okay, I've kind of gotten out of the storm now, and I was listening to music and kind of bopping through town and feeling really good. And I realized, hang on a second, I never feel this good. Like, I was just excited. I was kind of skipping while listening to the music, and then I thought, oh, hang on, maybe some people feel this way about life all the time. Maybe the way that I'm just kind of enjoying life and listening to my music, and maybe that's some people's, you know, default state. And yeah, that felt like kind of the refresher I needed. And yeah, it just, from one day to the next, cured the depression. It was quite amazing. And I know I felt very lucky about that, because I know that doesn't happen to many people.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, psychedelics in the current culture, there's a lot of hype around them as some kind of miracle cure, and they can function in that way for some people at some times. But not always. But very glad for you that it functioned in that way. That's really, really wonderful.
Thank you.
So yeah.
And I can say, I mean, the thing that also caught my attention about that was that my hedonic set point went up and stayed up at a higher level. So it wasn't just about sort of, you know, temporarily feeling good and then coming back down to baseline. The baseline was moved up. And that, I think, reorientated my whole sense about the project of trying to alleviate my own suffering and help others. Ultimately was, it's not about just having these short, like, trying to continuously kind of feel good and then come down, feel good, come down, feel good, come down. There's ways to permanently move the baseline up. And so that became more my project. That's what I was interested in.
Right. I think this might be a positive psychology phrase. Maybe you can remember the origin. I can't at the moment, but it really is possible to be better than well.
Better than well.
Great. Maybe you could just, again, briefly kind of walk us through I'm sure, we could do a whole podcast just on this, but that was that second psilocybin trip was how many years ago for you now?
Oh, 6.
6. So it was shortly after that you began meditation in earnest. Is that?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe so. 6 years, long time. But as best as you can, compress that journey to where you are now into something digestible. I
Okay.
make the attempt anyway.
Okay. So yeah, shortly after that second trip, I started fervently meditating and going into like longish meditation practices, if you count 1 hour being long, and doing lots of different techniques, and I was exploring a lot of different states of mind for about a little short of a year, and then in that time, I remember just a week after my 21st birthday, I got stream entry. And that was really clear to me because I was sitting in a philosophy classroom and I asked my professor a question. And as I was waiting for his response, there was a flash, which I think now would be a cessation. And then life was never the same after that. And it was like something changed. I mean, I didn't react. I kind of carried on in the class like normal, but then I came out of that class and sort of the world was a little bit sparkly and shimmering, and I felt different. I was like, what is this? What is this? I feel super, super, super content. And the way I would describe what was obvious there about the difference between, pre-stream entry and then after stream entry is, again, there was another bump in well-being. I'd say like a sort of a 10% increase in well-being. It like really life just got easier after stream entry. It takes the edge off. And it felt like I had opened up this dimension of equanimity in my mind that was permanently accessible. There was always this okay place in my mind, no matter what was happening. And then from there was the distancing of the self. Like I didn't feel like I was the personal self. I was not my emotions, not my thoughts, but at that point I was identifying with awareness. I'm that which is aware of those things and none of those things. And then
all right, before you go further, I want to interrupt and maybe briefly you could contextualize, just because some people may not be familiar with the term stream entry. Maybe you could just give like a capsule definition of the term. I think phenomenologically you gave a lovely description, but
how do you define stream entry? Well, okay, so I'm referencing the Theravada and fourth path model. Stream entry is the first of the 4 paths of enlightenment. All right. The Theravada Buddhism school.
Great. And if people want to Google that, stream entry, Theravada, Theravada, you'll find what we're talking about. All right, carry on.
So then, that's the. It's interesting to describe the different stages, because in some way, some of those descriptions will sound the same as the other stages, but they're understood from a different place, or they're understood, what is being described is understood more deeply, or there is actually a subtle distinction that's being made. It might not be obvious when it's just voiced in plain words, but stream entry is great. It sort of increases your well-being, reduces your suffering a great degree, and you have this kind of sense of like, oh, am I enlightened now, or like what? I feel good, but then I think quite quickly you realize, no, this isn't the full shebang, and you're still emotional and reactive and still suffering. And then, keep practicing, keep getting to work. And I mean, what to say, the second and third path are less monumental in terms of the shift. But then the shift to fourth path is gigantic. I mean, it's so blown away by shift into fourth path. It's really, it's what you kind of wish stream entry was all along and more. And yeah, I mean, we could go so much into it.
All right, that's probably where we'll spend most of the rest of the podcast. Before we move on, another term that it might be helpful to define for folks is cessation, which you briefly used there, this flash phenomenon. So maybe you could just give a little context for folks. What does that mean?
Yeah, cessation is when consciousness shuts off. So it's this briefest moment where there's no experience whatsoever. And there's a couple different doorways into it. And I mean, the way I describe the phenomenology of cessation is you got to be in a state of high equanimity, and there's a defocusing effect of all the sense doors, and then suddenly there's like a jump cut in experience, and then you feel refreshed and more awakened and alive.
Great. And from what I have read as well, from deeply concentrated states, like say the jhanas, the entry and the exit can actually be clearly perceived, and the kind of gradual cessation and then building up again of consciousness can be seen happening in real time, and that is very insightful and liberating. So
yeah, and you can begin to predict when a cessation is going to occur if you're able to track through the stages of insight, through the dark night stage into equanimity, low equanimity, high equanimity, and then okay, it's coming sort of any minute now, and then boom, and then you see it happen.
You can kind of feel it. It's like experience is, it's like it's ripe. It's it's like lacking the words at the moment, but something.
something. Yeah, this is what our conversation is gonna be like now. Just
something. Yeah.
something.
Well, perhaps, hopefully we can be a little clearer. And again, for people who haven't heard some of these terms before, the path of insight, or the progress of insight, sorry, not the path, is a 16-stage description of the progression of meditation up unto this point of cessation. Again, coming from the Theravada Buddhist tradition. Again, Google progressive insight Theravada, it'll pop right up. And again, for any of these terms we're using, any of the phenomenology we describe, there is vast and contentious disagreement about. So this is just two guys on the internet. Read up, and have your own thoughts and opinions.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of why I'm not so beholden to these terms or titles or anything. I just want to describe the phenomenology, and if people don't like the name being given to it, okay, so be it. But I'm trying my best to just accurately describe my phenomenology and what's going on.
Excellent. So moving on then, accurately describing your phenomenology. What's going on? What is life like? Can you give us a before and after? That's very difficult.
So good. It's so good. Yeah. Where to even begin? Okay, well, maybe we can take our time sort of getting into this. Again, following this theme of increase of the hedonic set point. So it's been about 10 months maybe now since I had my last shift. And okay, so before this last shift, okay, so I mean, one of the hallmark features that I used to describe sort of how my mind is it's like decentralized. It's permanent centerless mind. There's no singly positioned epistemic agent in the center. There's no knower of experience where there used to be. That has disappeared and hasn't reappeared. And before this shift, I was kind of, even though I was sort of able to attain states of deep peace and deep equanimity and sort of really deepening my insight into emptiness. Emptiness is another jargony term of Buddhism that might not mean what you think it means. You've got to look up what emptiness means. I still wasn't like, I was like, how does my well-being compare to others? I don't know. I don't know if have more well-being than other people's well-being. But now after this shift, it's abundantly obvious my well-being is ridiculously high compared to other people's. And so there's much to get into. One thing is the mood stability is off the charts. So before, I would feel lots of emotions, as everybody does, you know, that if you pay attention, you're always cycling through emotions. And it would seem that every kind of thought and sensation would have an emotional coloring to it. And then just depending on my energy levels and my blood sugar and how much sleep I had and temperament and what's happening, I'd be feeling waves of different emotions throughout the day in a very normal way. And as you meditate a lot, you become really, really sensitive to these emotions, so that even if it's just sort of percolating a little bit, it's like very clear to you. Oh, that's loneliness. Oh my God, I'm so lonely. Something like this. Now, really, there isn't this fluxing of emotions. It's just stably, I'm just good all the time, in a good mood all the time. And I didn't know this would be biologically possible. So another thing with going through the stages of insight is, I guess the 16 parts of how your attention will fluctuate and alter naturally, just as it is. If you know to look out for them, you can predict these changes in attention when you're sitting down to meditate. And each stage would change your relationship to being. So there's the dark night stages, there's disillusion, fear, misery, disgust, desire for deliverance, reobservation. And each one of those, as you go through them, you have a slightly different relationship to existence. Like, again, fearful of existence, and then desire for deliverance, kind of wanting to get over the hump of this moment to get to the next moment, because you're looking for the gold on the other side of the hill, and indulging in this moment, cherishing this moment. Now, when I sit to meditate, I can still go through these cycles and see attention, the quality of attention change, but it's not coming with this emotional bent to it, where my relationship to existence is changing. And in fact, in part, I feel, because the mind is decentralized, there's no one single spot that gets the final hearsay on calling, like, what does this being feel in relationship to existence? Because there's no one spot to speak for every other spot of being. It's I mean, and this speaks to the no self quality, where it's like you've just dissolved into existence, and it uproots the will to be and the will to not be as a type of hindrance. Just if I ask myself, do I want to continue living, or do I not want to continue living? And again, someone who's very familiar with suicidal thoughts, so very familiar with the will to not be, a part of me that's calling out to not be, and also, enjoying life, and a part of me that wants the will to be. Now, if I ask myself that, do I want to be or not be? There's no one to answer that question. It doesn't make sense. It falls on deaf ears in a way.
It's just a signal being dropped into a resonant bowl without like a pole in the middle.
Oh yeah, I like that. Yeah.
That's the metaphor that came to mind. Let's see. So you'll have to excuse me. My thoughts have dropped off.
That's all right. I know it happens. Yeah. But I mean, we kind of talk about this, I guess the phenomenology of fourth path and the hedonic set point. And
right. Okay. I wanted to play devil's advocate in here. Okay.
yes.
So pretending that I don't believe you for a moment, what if, in fact, through your attentional development, you are in fact just severely dissociating from your normal human feelings, and that without your conscious awareness of the fact, all of that is still operating beneath the level of your conscious awareness, and kind of puppeting your very equanimous, very internally happy mind, and yet all of that is still occurring just outside of your awareness because you've somehow excluded it.
Yeah, I'm quite familiar with dissociated states. So another ability that was gained once I got stream entry was this ability to enter into the witness, which is this kind of meditative move you can pull where you feel like you're, it's like engaging a dissociated state where you remove yourself. It's like you take one step back from the world and everything's kind of slightly less in focus and you don't feel personally attached to anything. It's like I'm just, the great witness seeing all of this stuff and I'm indifferent to it all that stuff. So I'm quite familiar with dissociated states in that sense. And I did have a bout of derealization as well at some point. At some point during, I think, third path, I actually went through a derealization experience. And normally that is characterized with the world seeming less in focus, less rich, less tangible, like you can't get a hold of anything and nothing is substantially real, but in actually a disheartening way, in a way that there's actually a mellow, like it's a bummer kind of effect going on. And normally I think dissociated people are not so expressive. And there's descriptions I could give about my state that would seem to overlap the dissociated state. I think where I could say, well, everything's like empty, everything's an illusion. It's like, no, none of it is real. None of it is really hard hitting. And, just spend time with me. You'll see that I'm pretty happy for a dissociated person. And I can still really get in touch with the phenomena and clearly track this stuff. And I think also dissociated state, there still is a sense of self, but it's a sense of self that's pulled back, that's trying to not look directly at the world, but turn its head slightly. This is different.
Excellent. So to summarize, you're because of your prior experience, again, pretending again that I'm suspending belief. That because of your past experience, you have kind of introspective discrimination between dissociated states and the state that you currently enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
You know the difference from memory and introspection in both cases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. I'm sure that that satisfies me. It might not satisfy other people. When this stuff is studied by science, I'm sure the differences will show up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can get more into the texture of space, of color, of the sights and sounds of your external quote unquote environment, and also perhaps what your relation to thoughts and images that appear in the mind. To give a contrast, for most people, most of the time, the outer world is a kind of solid space that one seems to be positioned within, and one's thoughts, feelings, and emotions are a kind of bubbling complex that interact and kind of bounce off of each other, that ripple out into actions, good and bad, and it's all quite solid, sticky. You seem to be describing the opposite of all of that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you and I had a conversation before about, and I was trying to describe how now the insight into emptiness is so stark that nothing ever has a chance to fully reify. It's like, imagine, I was saying this to you earlier, but I'll say it again for the sake of the podcast. There's kind of some threshold level that needs to be met for something to become a solid sort of concrete entity and be a fixed noun. And now whatever arises in the mind, whatever phenomena, thoughts, sounds, sights, whatever have you, it emerges and manifests, but it never meets this threshold. And there's a seeing of it disappearing the moment it's appearing. And so all that is, all qualia is understood to be hollow models. You know, they're all deeply empty, no matter how much they're manifesting.
So potentially, not that I suggest we do this, we could dial up the intensity of the stimulation of your experience. Shinzen Young uses a kind of gruesome example. If someone went medieval on him, that's his phrase, got out the blowtorch and the pliers.
That's Pulp Fiction. In Pulp Fiction, I'm going to go medieval on your ass.
He said, Shinzen will say, like, he'd have a bad time. Give him a few months though to kind of ramp up, and he'd be okay. Does that track?
I won't claim that level. I'm still adverse to painful stimuli. I still don't appreciate, being stabbed or anything like that. But I mean, I haven't experienced really, really painful stimuli. So I'd be really interested to hear of practices where you can endure that stuff more. But at this point, psychological suffering is basically non-existent. My only bothers in life are like physical discomforts. And luckily I don't experience a lot of physical pain. But if it were to, that's just a good way to test me. So I don't know if you want to come around at some point and start prodding me. We can try it out.
Age will do that work for us. We can check in when you're 60, 70, 80. Hopefully you live that long, conditions permitting.
Well, part of me doesn't care as well. This is the thing about the decentralized mind, that overcoming that hindrance of the desire to be, the desire to not be. When I sort of contemplate on death, there's a sense of, one thing I'm cautious about is saying things, and then you never know how you're going to react when the time comes. So I can talk all this stuff now while I'm in good health. But for now, it seems like, I'm less and less afraid of death. Yeah, and I think that is actually quite significant, because people don't realize the degree to which their fear of death is prompting them in their decisions and behaviors day to day.
For sure. Perhaps a good framing, we can bring in, a classical Buddhist analogy of the second arrow, with which I'm sure you're familiar. So there's the first arrow, which is the pains and aches that you're subject to just by virtue of having been born a mammalian organism. You're going to have pain, you're going to have hunger, you might not sleep that well all the time, and eventually you're going to get old, sick, and perish. That's unavoidable. We're stuck with it. We're embodied beings. Entropy does its thing, and we're eventually going to be shuffled off this mortal coil, whether we like it or not, with a heaping of pain along the way. However, what we don't realize, most of us anyway, you maybe being one of the exceptions, is that the majority, in fact, almost all of the suffering in existence, in our conscious experience, comes from this kind of construction and layering on top of that first arrow. The metaphor is, there's an arrow wound, and then you stick another arrow in there, like the pain is 100 times worse, whereas the first arrow, it's not that bad.
Yeah. It blew my mind as well, the reduction in suffering that has occurred. Yeah, the vast majority of our suffering is psychological suffering.
All right. So,
All right.
I mean, we could end there, but we have some time, so let's try to get a little more detailed about the bare, as bare as we can get with the construction of language, the bare phenomenology of your sensory experience. Let's talk about real basics. What if anything has changed in your perception of space? Physical extension.
Well, okay, the boundarylessness construction of the mind now that is ever evident. So right before Fourth Path, it felt like I was in this bubble of consciousness, and that bubble included everything that was in sight. Everything that could be experienced was encapsulated in this bubble. It was kind of like this cage of the mind. And now that one thing I talk about is actually that construction of the sense of the boundaries of mind is amodal perception, meaning you don't directly perceive it, but they're heavily inferred by the mind that there must be an edge because there's an edge to visual stimuli, yet this must mean the edge of the mind. But there's an understanding that whatever is projected in the mind is not the objective formulation of this thing. It's if you are experiencing space, that space is a model, and the model is empty as well. And so there's with this, once you reach a certain threshold level of insight into emptiness, you can never fully buy into the model. That's how it is. So it's projected, but you're not fully bought in. And you can see space appear and disappear, kind of experiences where there's no space, say seventh jhana. And then, there's that. There's like what is big or small. And in this space, there's no center. So there's no sense that everything is being orchestrated around one point or one knower. So all the phenomena appears where it appears, and it is known in its place where it appears, and is not referencing back to some homunculus.
Great. So to, again, just kind of put it into my own words, maybe it'll help some other people understand kind of what you're talking about. There's still enough of a perception of resistance or a fluctuation of space when you look out that, there's a relatively solid object over there. I'm not going to go walk into it. There's going to be, if I bump up against it, there's going to be resistance. However, it's not bought into. And that you can see in real time kind of the construction of the space of your experience, that where before there were solid boundaries, instead there's just the movement of space that temporarily gives the impression I'm in a room, this is a solid floor, my body is solid, etc. Is that?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And there's this sense of, this is like you finally get the freedom from the mind, like you're not encaged in a space. And they go, obviously the system can still be modeling the organism so that the organism could orientate in the environment and avoid lampposts, all those kind of things. But none of it's taken to be personal.
And maybe we could say, I want to get to time, but maybe we could say a little bit more about, I think, a very important element of the experience, which you referenced, that phenomena, objects of experience, objects are known where they are. The awareness of the objects is not different from the appearance of the objects themselves. Maybe you could say a bit more.
Yeah, that was fundamental to this realization that awareness or consciousness cannot be separated from the thing being known, the qualia. They are indistinguishable. It's not possible to separate them. And before in my path, there was, maybe someone could say that to me and I could relate to that, but the mind was still construing them as somehow slightly separate. Like there was still a slight division between the two. Maybe awareness is over the top of the thing being perceived, or just around it, or is like somehow a separate molecule that is in it. And if you're still conceiving of it like that, then there's this distinction. You got to realize, no, there can't be any distinction at all. You couldn't have one without the other.
I'm reminded of Dogen. This is going to be a bad paraphrase, but the study of Buddhism is the study of the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by the myriad things of the world. So in this case, being actualized of the things of the world is exactly what you're saying. There isn't some independent observer of things happening. There's just things happening.
To look at something and be fully looking at it and not having this slight time delay of watcher perceiving object reference back to watcher, this movement of information which slows the process down and interferes. It's like this, in the seeing, there's just the seen. It's immediately grasped, immediately apprehended.
Yeah, there's a slight lag, a slight disjunction, which is actually quite subtly painful once you catch on to it. And having that gone. Oof.
Well, okay, then we can move into time. Do you want to go into time now, or
I think we're good. Let's go into time.
Let's move through time into the conversation on time.
Into the timeless now.
Or not the now. So this was my surprise. Yes, because it's one thing, Eckhart Tolle always talks about is the now. It's always the now. And then, which is a really good thing to recognize, but is your mind subtly construing the now as an object, as a thing, as a place? And what I found is that everything is so empty that there isn't even a now. There isn't even enough time for something to fully manifest and exist in even one moment. It can't, because everything is appearing and disappearing. It's hard to talk about it without time, but so incredibly simultaneously, that a now cannot even take hold, cannot consolidate itself. And perhaps this is recognized, again, through the decentralized mind. Well, what makes up the mind? The present moment is actually sort of a construing of multiple data points that are outside of direct experience, we presume are inputs that are taken in across a series of time, and then the brain forms a picture of the now. But also, because we're trying to preemptively interact with the future to predict what is coming next, your now is actually a subtle prediction of the future as well. The past meets the future. And with this decentralized mind, again, there's no single entity in the center who gets to decide what is the now. What is the mind pulls a blank. It can't conceive of, that was the now. Whereas before, third path, there was still the epistemic agent who could be like, okay, now, and now there's no one to call that shot, and definitely not speak for the rest of the system. And what I found was, before I would try to be mindful, and the way I'd think about being mindful was I would slow down my behavior. And I felt like I was trying to pay more attention to the now, what is happening now, get more into the now. At fourth path, one thing was I lost the ability to be mindful. Meaning, mindful could be understood in many ways, but what I mean is, there's no possibility to not be present. It's so understood that even thoughts about the future are arising here. It makes no difference for me to slow down my behavior. and pay attention, I mean, yeah, I can pay attention to things in more detail, but there's no sense that by doing that, I'm becoming more conscious. Mm-hmm. You know, whereas before there was that kind of sense like, okay, now I'm being really mindful and more conscious. Now there's no distinction there.
Excellent. So one way you could say it is that by closing the gap spatially between observer and observed, and between past and future, actually what here and now, they vanish, and this is borne out in current cognitive science and neuroscience. The present is specious, the specious present. It doesn't actually exist. It's a multifaceted construction that is sustained by basically introspective fuzziness. And when you ramp up the clarity enough, there's just things happening simultaneously, all at once, but not in one bound moment of time. Does that describe your experience?
Yeah, I liked how you described that, and it's really interesting to see how modern cognitive science seems to be really aligned with meditative perception.
I'm aware as well of the tendency among Buddhists. I think I would identify as one is, you've done mostly Buddhist meditation. Would you consider yourself a Buddhist?
Not really. Again, I mean, I'm very influenced by Buddhism for sure, but I'm not beholden to it. I also recognized I'm pretty ignorant about Buddhism. So, but I'm super influenced by Buddhism.
There's kind of a privileging in a lot of modern religious science dialogue of Buddhism as kind of a scientific religion, in ways that, when you inspect closely the tradition, the claims that are made, and current cognitive science, it's kind of a modernist confabulation. The philosopher Evan Thompson does a really good job of kind of unpacking. It's like a very specific constructed version of Buddhism, really within the last 2 centuries, that has kind of been custom built to fit with modern science. So of course it works. Of course it fits together nicely.
Although they had wacky metaphysical beliefs where like the whole world was sitting on water, or there was like just water under the ground forever.
Oh sure, yeah. If you actually look at traditional Buddhist belief and dogma orthodoxy, you will find just as much that is incompatible with modern science as any other religion. It's just the version of Buddhism which has kind of been exported and adopted by Western converts like myself, has kind of been custom made to fit our biases and prejudices, which if you don't know that, read Evan Thompson's Why I'm Not a Buddhist, or David McMahon's The Making of Buddhist Modernism, and the wool will be cleared from your eyes. I felt I should stick that in there.
Yeah, I remember Evan Thompson. I remember I listened to a podcast by him, I think Michael Taft's podcast, and then I wrote him an email, I think, just saying like, oh, it's like really inspired because he's a meditator, but he's also a philosopher. And I was like, that's what I like. So,
yeah. Well, hopefully, not that I believe in these sorts of things, but, manifesting with intention. Hey, I'm hoping I can get Evan on here at some point. Maybe I can get Evan and you in dialogue. That would be fun.
Oh my.
He would really put you to the fire. He'd be incisive, and I think you could handle it. It'd be fun.
Cool.
I mean, we covered space, we covered time, we covered identity or the lack thereof, and the non-fixation of space and time. Let's see.
What else is there?
What else is there? Consciousness. Although consciousness, there, if you ask, what is consciousness? It's like, well, this stuff. There's the sense,
The ability to see all these things defabricate, see space defabricate, time defabricate, and then eventually consciousness shut off as well.
Yeah.
I mean, revolutionizes your understanding of reality.
For sure.
You witness these things happen.
Let's maybe we have again a little bit more time. Maybe we could talk about metaphysics, what your relationship is to your cognitive relationship, because I know your perceptual relationship to space, time, and identity is quite abnormal, though normative from a Buddhist perspective. what is your relationship, if any, your cognitive, verbal relationship to the notion of consciousness, of space, and of time? We covered the perceptual version. What, or do you just not speculate?
No, I'm inquisitive and interested in nature of reality and what is going on. What can we infer about reality beyond direct experience? What is out there? What is happening? I'm, strikingly, I'm probably quite physicalist. I do imagine there is a brain construing these things. There is an organism, a biological entity that's taking an input from the world, and evolution has, shaped consciousness, and the things we perceive are probably because they were beneficial for our survival. And it makes me wonder, is space and time, I have a kind of thought that, in, what's it called? The study of symbols and such, where you can, I'm blanking on the name of the domain, the topic. You can have symbols that look directly like what they're trying to depict. There's a difference between sort of icons, symbols.
There's an itch somewhere in my cognitive space that is like, I know, maybe it'll come up, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so traffic light, red means stop, green means go. But red has nothing to do with stopping, and green has nothing to do with going. If you look directly at the color red, like we've created an association there. Where there's smoke, there's fire. You see smoke, you reckon there's fire. But then you could actually draw a symbol of a flame that looks like fire, and you associate, okay, this picture of flames with fire. Our perception of space and time, are they actually tracking something that is kind of spacey and timey beyond direct experience? Or are they a version construed in the mind to give the simplified understanding of something beyond itself, something much more sophisticated, or something that's totally different? And it's like, how much of a correlation is there between our experience of space and time and what it is supposed to be representing beyond experience? And they could be highly similar or not similar at all. And I sort of wonder, actually, perhaps they're not very similar at all, that actually what greater reality is, like time, our linear perception of time, it's not like that.
Yeah. I mean, from what little, and it's very little, I know of quantum mechanics and state-of-the-art physics, I read the pop science articles. My goodness, our perception of space and time is nothing at all like what is happening according to our best models of physical reality. And best minds in the world disagree hotly about foundations of space and time. Is it emergent? Is it just, space-time, is one kind of unified field equation, from what I understand. So they're not actually different. They're and this can be observed as well in meditative experience, that the experience of space, the experience of time, they co-arise.
Well, yeah. I mean, they seem to be emergent in experience. And again, but how much of our experience is tracking with greater reality? So another thought with the self, like with the self models are actually quite latent in experience, where you see the sense of a personal identity with history and thoughts and modeling of the body schema and where you are in position in relation to someone else, and tracking how this organism's behavior is and personality type is, and trying to model the other person in front of you, and seeing those constructions actually appear quite late. Once you get your noticings per second quite fast, you see like actually these are pretty delayed functions, and there's like lots of things to recognize before that even comes online. And then there's this thought I have about, okay, how are you construing God if you think God has a personal identity And if God is conscious, the conscious cosmos, and he is a personal identity, well, is that personal identity actually that delayed of a function like it is for humans? And it's like, well, then why would you call something so delayed the ultimate God? And there's things more foundational before it. And when it comes to consciousness, again, you have to see in your own mind, are you construing consciousness as a kind of special substrate, as a special substance or film? How thick is consciousness perceived to you as like it is actually a thing existing? I would argue even consciousness is empty. And in that sense, it doesn't really exist. I'd imagine it's maybe perhaps the biggest trick ever played. We're convinced we're conscious, and it's like, how do you know you're conscious? Well, I just am. It's as if you can't not be fooled by this thing. But then again, it speaks to why can't we say anything about it? I think when it comes to perceiving colors, you say, okay, this is kind of an orangey red notebook. And it's like, how do you know it's orangey red? Well, I just see it, but I can't describe it to a blind person. There's nothing I can say about this color. Yet I'm convinced I'm seeing it. And there's nothing I can say about consciousness, yet I'm convinced I'm conscious. I think is perhaps the biggest trick.
This goes straight to the heart of some of the most abstruse and enjoyable, if you like that kind of thing, Buddhist philosophy, where in fact anything and everything that you could possibly term with a noun or a verb for that matter is upon final analysis empty or unfindable. That's a good word. It speaks to exactly what you're saying. The atoms of experience, you really discern both with inference and with yogic, meditative perception, consciousness, space, time, medium-sized dry goods. If you really look, there's nothing. There's no thing there. There's appearance, but you can't find either through inference or perception. You can't find any substance.
But perhaps this is something interesting to talk about as well. Something I'm trying to detail, that there's a super precision perception that is attained at fourth path, where you're seeing simultaneous expansion and contraction, simultaneous form and emptiness. And again, with the decentralized mind, it's like there's such fast information processing that it's like you almost see the trick, that you see that what this is, it's not what we thought it is. There's clearly something, but it's not a thing like a noun. And yet it all seems to be empty, and yet it's not like there's nothing. It's some special something that defies categorical comprehension.
The Buddha called it. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, you go.
The Buddha called it yathabhuta, or tatata, suchness, or things as they are. That's how yathabhuta is sometimes translated, and I'm probably getting the pronunciation wrong. But when asked about the final reality of things, the Buddha, or in later texts, the Bodhisattvas, they'd either just remain silent, hold up a finger, then that's kind of a Zen thing, or a flower, or whack with a stick, or you end up with something that's not very satisfying to the conceptual mind, because the conceptual mind is trying to fabricate a picture, a syntactical sentence to grasp at the objects, to thingify, to reify experience. But when you look closely through inference or in fact direct perception, you can't say anything about it. I mean, you can say things about it, but you're saying things about what aren't things. Which is very unsatisfying until it isn't.
well until it isn't. Yeah, I mean, for me, there's this sense that it seems totally sensical. It seems like it makes the most sense, actually, that it's neither something nor nothing. And it's not unsatisfying at all. I won't say satisfying, because nothing is ultimately satisfactory. You should know that's the three characteristics, but it's not unsatisfying.
I'm forgetting the name of the sutta, but
I think your begins... camera has
it's defocused. There we go. Yeah,
it's going into the witness.
And we're back. That was a cessation right there. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, there's a sutta in which someone asks the Buddha some question. I'll put the sutta reference. I'll be able to find it after the episode. I'll put it down there. But the Buddha replies to the question: the world relies on a distinction that between existence and non-existence. And then he goes on to spell out in great detail why this is mistaken, and that the reality of things it doesn't apply.
The Diamond Sutra?
No, this is in the Pali Canon, although the Diamond Sutra is also just a lot of that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. This has been great fun. I think perhaps if you have some kind of final benediction, encouragement.
Well, encouragement, really encourage people to meditate. That there is a path and progress to make, and it's so worth it. The reduction in suffering is outstanding. It's, to put it one way, people always talk about, they've got this sort of like the God-shaped hole in them, or they're trying to fill that hole inside of them. And people look for money, sex, and drugs, or whatever. And then there's a thought that that's not how you should fill the hole. You should fill the hole with something healthy, sports and relationships, or healthy relationships at least. And then and then there's another thought that but even none of those things would do. You have to fill the hole with Jesus, with someone. And for me, getting fourth path is like, there's no hole. That hole, it's not that it was filled by God or anything. It's like you recognize there is no hole.
There is no spoon.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, and I'll put it in the show description. But where can people find you, Roger, if they want to get in contact?
Oh yeah. So I've got a meditative group we've got a website called meditative.dev, and we run a group there. But if people want to contact me personally, I've got a Facebook page. You can send me a message there, and I like to hear from people.
All right, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll probably do this again sometime. Something will come up.
Cool. Thank you, Winston.
All right, great fun.